Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 700 Club. A giant leap toward peace in the Middle East. Israel and the United Arab Emirates have signed a historic agreement, thanks to President Trump, who brokered Israel's first peace deal in more than a quarter of a century. So what country is expected to go ballistic over this deal? Chris Mitchell reports from Jerusalem.
President Trump made the historic announcement at the White House.
After 49 years, Israel and the United Arab Emirates will fully normalize their diplomatic relations. They will exchange embassies and ambassadors and begin cooperation across the board and on a broad range of areas, including tourism, education, healthcare, trade, and security. This is a truly historic moment.
It's been 26 years since Israel signed a peace deal with Jordan in 1994, and more than 40 years since they agreed to peace with Egypt in 1979. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu hailed this agreement, dubbed the Abraham Accord, as a new era of peace.
Israel and the UAE are two of the most advanced countries in the world. Together, we'll transform the region and forge an even better future for our people. This is a future of peace, a future of security, and a future of prosperity.
According to the agreement, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu will delay his goal of annexing parts of Judea and Samaria, Israel's biblical heartland. But he said he would not give up declaring that sovereignty off his agenda or give up Israel's right to the land. In 2018, CBN News traveled to the UAE with a delegation of U.S. evangelical leaders, led by Christian author and Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg, to meet with the country's Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Zayed.
It was an off-the-record meeting at the time, but I can tell you that the Crown Prince was direct with us. I am ready to make peace with Israel. We were stunned.
Rosenberg believes this peace agreement will be much different than Israel's peace deals with Egypt and Jordan.
The peace deal that's emerging between the United Arab Emirates and Israel, I think, is going to be dramatically better, richer, warmer, as it were, than the previous peace deals with Egypt and Jordan. I think this is going to actually become the model of what a peace treaty can be, and I think we're going to see more in the not too distant future.
Those countries could include Bahrain, Oman, and Morocco. A major factor bringing Israel and the UAE together is their common enemy, Iran.
Iran is going to go ballistic over this deal. And what we have to pray as Christians all over the world is they don't literally go ballistic.
President Trump said he will be inviting both Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Zayed to the White House soon to formally sign the agreement. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, as was mentioned, a key issue in this deal was Israel's plans to annex parts of the biblical areas of Judea and Samaria. So what happens to those lands now? John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. John?
Thanks, Terry. Although Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has put plans for annexing areas on the back burner for now, the U.S. ambassador to Israel, David Friedman, tells CBN's David Brody in an exclusive interview that Israeli citizens who live in those areas now will never be asked to leave because the biblical territory of Israel that God gave to the Jewish people is safe. Here's a look at David's interview.
Let's talk about that tense issue of sovereignty. And so the position here is what on sovereignty in terms of annexation and sovereignty, and explain exactly how this is going to work.
Sure. Well, first of all, we prefer the word sovereignty rather than annexation. We think it's a more accurate term. If you look at the joint statement that was put out by all three nations, we chose the word suspend. Okay, that word was chosen carefully. The word suspend, if you look it up, means that it's a temporary halt. So to be clear, sovereignty is not off the table, but you can't pursue this enormous opportunity, not just for peace with the Emirates, but what I think will be a much larger opportunity. You can't do it at the same time as you're pursuing the sovereignty. So you have to prioritize. The president correctly is prioritizing peace. He's saying, let's give this a chance. This is once in a lifetime. It's certainly once in a generation. Let's see how far we can go with this. So right now we're putting all our eggs in the basket of trying to advance the cause of peace in the region. Then we're going to see how we can export that to a number of other countries and really change the landscape of the Middle East in a materially better way. And then we're going to do all of that, bearing in mind that we put out a peace plan that contemplates that the Jews who live in Judea and Samaria, the Israeli citizens living in Judea and Samaria, will never be asked to leave their homes. The flags that are flying over Shiloh and Beit El and Hebron and Gush Etzion that are flying over there today, they're going to be flying over there tomorrow and the next day, and we think forever.
The UAE, I just want to understand this. Do they believe that this is a suspension, or do they believe this sovereignty issue is gone for good? Because that's important.
No, I think the UAE understands that it is temporary. Now, how long that takes,
sure,
is subject to how things develop.
So, from a biblical homeland standpoint, we hear so much about that evangelical Jews care about, Orthodox Jews. I mean, you're saying what to them regarding this plan? I'm
saying take a deep breath and let us work through what we've just begun, which I think has huge opportunity. And we are not taking the notion of sovereignty off the table. But whether you're an Orthodox Jew or you're a devout Christian, we all follow the same Bible. And in Psalm 120, King David, who was the greatest warrior the Jewish people have ever known, what did King David say in the last sentence of Psalm 120? I am for peace, they are for war. And we have to pursue peace as the first initiative. I think we just have to. We owe it to our children and our grandchildren. But believe me, the biblical territory of Israel that was given to the Jewish people by God, that is not in any way being taken off the table.
I know you're a devout believer yourself in the Jewish faith. So talk to me a little bit about God's role in all of this, because I know you feel very strongly like, look, you can do what you can do as a person, but ultimately there's someone higher than both of us.
Sure. Well, look, God's will be done. That's as certain as the sun shining every morning. God's will be done. We live in this earth with a finite capacity to see the entire picture. We absorb the facts. We do the best we can to make the world a better place, to follow God's commandments, to live a just and moral life. And then, God takes it from there. So we do what we have to do and what we can do. But ultimately, I believe that God's will is going to be done.
As it relates to the region itself, you mentioned this. What about cooperation from other states? I mean, are you hoping this deal with the UAE leads others, like, for example, Bahrain? I know the big fish, if you will, Saudi Arabia at some point. I mean, that would be huge, obviously. What's your sense of how this might be a domino effect?
So we've looked at this, and I think the president mentioned it earlier today in the Oval Office. It's an icebreaker. It's a real icebreaker, and from here, not to mix metaphors, but I think the dominoes are likely to fall. Now, who, when, how? There are a lot of opportunities out there.
And that was CBN Chief Political Analyst David Brody reporting. Thanks, David. Well, what's being called a Holy Spirit hunch may have saved many lives in the wake of that horrific explosion in Beirut. Pastor Saeed Deeb of Life Center Church Beirut told CBN's Wendy Griffith he sent his entire staff and scores of children home the day of the blast because he sensed something very bad was about to happen.
As if the Holy Spirit say, go, 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 go. So I was saying, everybody, go, go, go home, go home, go home, pushing them, turn off the computers, forcing them to leave. I was forcing them. And they said, we are cooking. We need to distribute food for refugees and for the poor. I said, today, cancel everything, put it in the fridge. So they were thinking I lost my mind. But they didn't know, and I didn't know, this is the Holy Spirit prompting.
Life Center Church Beirut sits only about a mile from the epicenter of that explosion. Pastor Deeb says the blast that blew out windows and doors surely would have taken lives. More than 200 people died from the explosion. Thousands were injured, and even more are now homeless. Terry, I was reading my Bible this morning. The verse of the day was from Galatians. It says, if we live by the Spirit, let us also walk in step with the Spirit. It looks like Pastor Saeed was certainly walking in step with the Spirit.
Absolutely, John. You know, it pays to spend time with the Lord so you recognize that still small voice when he speaks to you. He is the shelter in the storm for certain.